I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I want you to get up right now. Get up, go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Things have got to change.
Things do have to change. People are mad as hell, but they don't know what to do. The people who have not stuck their head out a window have not come out into the streets. The people who have not registered their anger and frustration and outrage at the corruption of every one of our systems, every one of our institutions has betrayed us. Every one. That does not mean they're not good people in different institutions. Does not mean that they're people who are doing the best they can within whatever job they have within those institutions. It means that those who control those institutions, they're never mad. They don't have to be. They don't have to march in the streets. They control the streets. They control the groups that march in the streets. They don't have to be shamed. You wouldn't know their names. They also don't have to deplatform anyone because they get you to do it. They've got us fighting each other. Democrat, Republican, fighting. Conservative, liberal, fighting. Atheist and true believers, fighting. They have so much internecine conflict occurring within our society that we've been overwhelmed by this angst and fear and the uncertainty of what today will bring that we forgot that we're human beings. And we shouldn't look at a person's skin. We shouldn't look at their background. We shouldn't look at their education nor their gender. We shouldn't look at their body politic, nor should we look at their cultural similarities or differences. We shouldn't look whether they're young or old, but rather that they're a human being. Everyone should be invited to sit at the table and not pointing fingers at one another and saying, you owe me this, or I did this. We shouldn't self-shame or shame others. We should look at what we can do to create solutions where we go into the future together, holding hands, touching hearts, and mending our pain. Otherwise, they've won. They've won up to this point. Our scholars have ceased looking for the truth. Everything is superficial. Everything is a microaggression. And the newest generation are the most vulnerable, and it's not their fault. I do not blame them. It's their parents. These are people born into bubbles, the vast majority, who have no sense of history, no sense of what it means to be a citizen who cares about themselves, their family, their community, and their country. We become tribal. We become primordial. We become distracted by the most hedonic or hedonistic of all principles, base pleasure. There are still those amongst us, the majority I would say, that have the ethics, morality, and decency and the good-naturedness to be able to wake up each day and appreciate that they have a life, and they're not there to demean or deny other people the virtues of their lives. They're not racist, they're not bigots, they're not misogynists. They're just human beings, imperfect as we are, trying to do the best they can to survive another day. But look at the people who are the loudest, who are screaming with the least amount of tolerance, who want censorship, who only want one right, theirs, and everyone else is the enemy. This is not the way that we should be living. Erase all of our gains, erase all of our growth, erase all of the achievements, erase all that we have done in the name of peace and love and solidarity, and just be angry all the time at everything and everyone? We're dealing with that today. We're going to talk about servants and slaves, starting with the Irish, but looking at all the different countries, which are most, and all the different civilizations, almost all, and almost all the religions, almost all, that have engaged in slavery. What have we learned? What have they learned? What have they learned so that they can appreciate the uniqueness of a person that once would have been a slave in their culture historically? And where are there still people living as indentured today or as wage slaves today? And what responsibility do we have in being conscious of the products we're purchasing? Because think of it this way. Think of the people who do not realize behind the racial card is a much bigger game. And the people are smart enough who are playing that game to get you distracted so you don't pay attention to global warming. You don't pay attention to overconsumption. You don't pay attention to obesity and hunger in the United States and around the world. You don't pay attention to the wars. You don't pay attention to 55% of the military-industrial complex absorbing all of our other monies, hence deplatforming financially social assistance programs, food assistance programs, housing assistance programs. They don't want you to see that they are making what they once supported a proper and legal entry into the United States to assimilate into our society is opening up every barrier for political gain to win an election. Why? Because they want to maintain their power unquestioned. And they would and will. So we're going to question that and look for positive solutions, because it's only by that we actually grow. We need to empower ourselves on everything we do. And that's what this show is about. And I'll encourage you later on to call in and share your points of view. We're starting today, as we always do, with the latest on health and healing. A study from the University of California at Irvine talked about pickled capers. Now, capers are those tiny little black, they look like little orbs, and generally they're used in Italian and Spanish and French cooking. They're a subtle seasoning, generally in pasta sauces. Well, those little capers activate proteins important for the human brain and heart health. That's according to this University of California Irvine study. Yes, those tiny little capers regulate the control of your body processes. It's a compound inside the pickled caper that activates those proteins required for normal human brain and heart activity. And they can lead then to future therapies for the treatment of epilepsy and abnormal heart rhythms. And this was published in the peer-reviewed journal Communications Biology. And then we have a study from Sezhnevo University in Russia, published in the respected International Journal of Molecular Medicine, that zinc, not a lot, maybe 30 milligrams a day, is very important for COVID-19 prevention. They were also joined in this collaboration by scientists from Germany, Greece, and Russia. They studied the role of zinc in the preservation and treatment of viral infection, or the prevention and treatment of viral infections and pneumonia. And they said it definitely works. So if you want to have one more thing you could do, along with vitamin C and vitamin D, and also astragalus, olive leaf extract, wild oregano oil, And I would also say echinacea and paldiarco, P-A-U-D-A-R-C-O, that's very strongly antibacterial. Then add in now zinc to your daily regimen. University of Nebraska and Texas Biomedical Institute, they're showing that cannabis-derived CBD oil could help reduce the deadly COVID lung infection. Again, that's another tool. Researchers at the University of Nebraska and the Texas Biomedical Research Institute have recently published a peer-reviewed article that suggested that CBD could be included in the treatment regimen of COVID-19 coronavirus. And research says that both the THC and CBD appear to reduce the severe lung inflammation associated with the virus. This was published in Brain Behavior and Immunity. So that's important. Again, another piece of the puzzle. And from São Paulo University Health Center in Brazil, avocado improves cardiovascular and autonomic recovery following submaximal running. So if you're an athlete and you want to have a greater capacity to recover, avocado salad. From Cambridge University, apathy, not depression, helps predict dementia. Now this audience knows, we've discussed it a great deal, that apathy offers an important early warning sign of dementia in individuals with cerebrovascular disease, but depression does not. And depression is often thought to be a risk factor for dementia, but this may be because some depression scales used by clinicians and researchers partially assess apathy. And this is from King's College London and Roubaud and Oxford. The study is published in the current Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery, and Psychiatry. And it's the first to examine the relationship between apathy and depression and dementia in individuals with cerebral small vessel disease. I counseled someone earlier this year who had beginning dementia. And what I found was that virtually all of this person's physical limitations were due not to depression, but rather apathy, the surrendering of joy, the surrendering of happiness, the complete acceptance of the inevitability of death coming at a later stage of life. And so my whole emphasis was to get this person to replace apathy with hope, so that you're going to be hopeful that you can do something that before you would have said, I can't do it. And indeed, this person was able, focusing upon the positive things that you can control, because the negative you can't. And the negative takes you to the nobo effect, meaning what you fear, what you focus upon, your body becomes, versus the placebo effect, which is not an inert, it is your mind, which is very powerful. Remember this, almost all the work I do is not just in giving some dietary advice or exercise or stress management or supplementation that you need. It is all based upon a much more profound principle of bringing rebalance to an imbalanced DNA. And for that, there has to be an understanding of the frequency that you're functioning at, both psychologically, spiritually, and physically. And then, as you recalibrate a person's energy, you're also bringing the symmetry of harmonizing a higher level of frequency, because the frequency then attenuates and dictates whether or not that cell's basic energy will be doing the right thing or the wrong thing for itself. And we've all experienced this. If you've been around people and you just feel drained by them, they're negative, they're toxic, and you've been around happy people and positive people and people that make you laugh, you walk out of a comedy club or watching, Bill Maher or some of the other people. He is, by the way, I got to hand it to him. Thank goodness he did not accept the generation that's out there now that says, the woke generation that's completely buried themselves up to their eyeballs in this fetid sentiment of microaggressions. He just rips them apart. He is the most modern version, incomplete and imperfect as it is, of George Carlin. If George Carlin was alive today, he would say, good for you, Bill, because Bill goes after it. He will not shy away from controversy. He'll take on the most controversial topics, and the people involved in that laugh with him. That's what you want, because that laughter is the placebo effect. It rebalances out of balance a synergy and energy of the cell. In effect, you're harmonizing your energy, and we need to do that. Probably the greatest person in the history of the world to understand energy was Tesla, and he got it right. He just didn't have the right financial sponsorship. Edison did. But in any case today, if you want to change how you're going to live, you've got to change your energy, the imbalance in your energy. And that means you have to do some quiet, non-cluttered, non-distractible, deep meditation. And then you can. I saw it in this person. So we've been thinking depression is the key. It's not depression. And so it's just a whole new way of looking that apathy, because when apathy happens, you give up. You're not going to stick your head out the window, go protest, write a letter. You're not going to vote for an independent third-party candidate. You're just going to be apathetic. And that leads to what you fear. Worth paying attention to. Also, for those of you who are eating beets, good. Drinking beet juice, even better. You are, according to this randomized double-blind crossover study done at the University of Cordoba in Spain, you are increasing resistance training big time. So have yourself that juice before you work out. And tomorrow I'm going to do an in-depth discussion of a nutrient you probably have never heard of. It's called hesperidin, Hesperidin. It's a citrus bioflavonoid, but it's extremely important. And I'm going to go into why you should be including it, or at least the products that it's made from citrus, on a daily basis because of its strong anti-inflammatory effects in the body. But I'm going to do a whole classroom on the air on it. Now, we're going to take a break. And when we come back from the break, we're going to take a look at some things that I believe are important that we're faced with today and see how we're going to deal with them. And if it doesn't, hopefully, and that's my hope, put some of what we're facing today into a little different and more manageable perspective. Let's give proper and historical context to some things that we're dealing with. But before we do that, here's the latest. And that's why I played this clip about Howard Beale, the character in the movie Network, Pidachevsky, a brilliant man. I mean, Hospital and Network, two of the finest films of the 1970s. Quote, foreshadowing the year 2021, half of America faces poverty. The pandemic has caused chaos in the American job market, but you wouldn't know it from the free market groups who insist that we're just doing fine. Half. You're talking then about 160 million, more or less, Americans, and a lot of those are kids. How can we not make that a priority? How can we as a nation allow our kids to go to bed hungry and be malnourished or morbidly obese by being fed junk food? How can we go to bed knowing that there are people around the world, right now in Yemen, almost 19 million people starving to death, and especially the kids? How can we not feel empathy and demand that that become a priority and march for that? None of the important issues that impact us immediately, like the environment, are we paying attention to. We're contributing to it. So maybe it's a time for a reset. Also, not just that in the news, but also the entire gas industry, oil industry, and hydrofracking industry is now going bankrupt. Defaulted debts, worthless shares, collapsed prices on oil and gas, it's over. And so we must start to do two things immediately in a positive way. We must start to change our lifestyle, stop eating all meat, And anything that has a heartbeat or a face, don't eat it. Let it live. Secondly, we've got to stop over-consuming. Only buy or grow the food you need. We throw away enough food to feed India with all of our leftovers, and then they just rot, and we shouldn't allow that. Also, let's go from genetically engineered to organic. That's going to help contribute by lowering the carbon footprint, because if you eat an apple grown locally or lettuce grown locally, it doesn't have to create a carbon footprint by being driven 5,000 miles from Mexico or California, Oregon to where you live. So buy local, support local farmers, especially those that are organic. Also, let's stop buying things we don't need. Stop buying the clothes, stop buying everything that you actually don't require. All this will make you contributing as an environmental activist in a positive way. Okay? Simple things we can do, because we want to get off all of our petrol products. It'll take time. It can't be overnight. It'll probably be over a 10-year period. But let's really put our weight not behind solar at this moment, because that's really green capitalism. The people who, and behind all the people behind Greta Thunberg, that was a real game. We explained it. It's become true, and none of those teenagers are out there changing their diet, unfortunately, because I keep regular daily statistics of how many people are vegan and not. Hasn't moved the needle a point. But what we can do, is we can start insisting upon putting money upon wave power from the Great Lakes to the Mississippi, Missouri, and the great rivers, the Ohio River, to the shores around the United States. That is non-polluting and energy generating, plus all of the geothermal from all of the hot springs around the United States. Let's focus on that, plus bladeless wind turbines. Those are the things that are real, and we could do that and help make the transition by no longer giving any financial support. And that's your Democrats and Republicans working together to support and subsidize with our dollars the shale and gas and oil industry. Let's close down nuclear at the same time. Also, for those of you who were thinking, well, if I get the coronavirus, I'm immune for life. No, you're not. There is an exclusive published in The Guardian today. King's College London team found steep drops in patients' antibody levels 3 months after infection, which means you'd be susceptible to another infection. So if you've recovered, and let's hope that you have, from Corona-19, you may lose your immunity to the disease within months. So keep that in mind. That's the latest study on that. And also, the CDC whistleblower identified the fatal flaw in testing years ago. And in 2016, the Zika outbreak, according to Nick Schwellenbach, he said that, quote, a CDC and virus expert blew the whistle. He alleged the CDC was promoting a test that was far less reliable than another in use at public health labs across the United States. He further charged that the agency had concealed this information from the broader public health community. But he directed his most fundamental critique at what he saw as an increasingly bureaucratic and centralized approach at the CDC that hamstrung testing for quickly spreading pathogens. So this was in 2016. Now, what do we know now, right now, about the CDC? It gave us contaminated test kits. It gave us flawed test kits. It's been using tests like the PCR test that is not a gold standard. It is not accurate. You have a high degree of false negatives, meaning you could have the virus and it would show you didn't, or you false positives, you have no virus and it shows you do. So all of our statistics have not had a gold standard. There's no universal test for that yet. But the CDC has been on top of that and controls it, and as along with Anthony Fauci. One last thing to consider. Over the last 25 years, I've done a series of broadcasts challenging the legitimacy of the CDC. We were the first radio program to break the story about the Tuskegee experiment. 40 years of using African Americans, poor African Americans, for their syphilis experiment. They didn't treat these people. They could have. They caused, we don't know how many, but understand syphilis is so easy to spread. You can spread it in a kiss, a handshake, using a utensil someone used. So imagine how many of those 400 people had communications or intimate, or even just, playing ball together and sweating. So many ways you can get this through multiple, at least 2 generations. It could go into the millions. Yet their valued lives were not valued. So that same systemic racist institution turns right around and does the same thing in 2000 and 2004. We know why they did it, who was involved. We have it all on tape. Dr. William Thompson said that there was a 324% increase in African American boys 16 months and younger, 36 months and younger, who were getting the MMR vaccine. Young boys. How many would have gotten it and possibly have ended up getting autism? Over 100,000. So they hid it. They confiscated all the research and lab notes and put them into a black bag and destroyed it, except for one copy he kept. And that became the smoking gun. So when he confessed all this to Professor Hooker, Brian Hooker from California, whose son had autism, and he was communicating, and Hooker saw that he was doing a mea culpa, he began to record it. I have all these recordings. I've listened to them. I put them into my last documentary, A Deadly Deception. In any case, he has not been allowed to testify before Congress. Democrats that control the committee won't allow him to testify. Why aren't they being challenged? Why are not all the people in the Black Caucus challenging him? Why are there not marches in front of the CDC? That is a legitimately systemic racist institution, racist today. We're not talking about in the past, today. The CDC, the entirety of it. Why aren't we dealing with it? Why is this not being discussed? It should be. Children's lives are at stake. So that's something we should deal with. Those are just some of the things happening in today's world. And also I want to thank Charles Ortley, the former publisher of the most important and most widely read gay newspaper in America, the New York Native, and his entire staff, especially someone I used to interview a lot, Nina Ostrom, one of his editors. They had the courage to take on the AIDS establishment. And they took it on and they lost. They were deplatformed, they were slandered, yet they were honest and they told the truth. Look back now, who was their enemy? Anthony Fauci. Who lied about so much? Anthony Fauci. Who was out there promoting AZT, which was killing hundreds of thousands of Americans? You could look at the package insert. You couldn't tell the difference between AIDS killing you, HIV killing you, or the drug, AZT, at 1,500 milligrams. Anthony Fauci and Robert Gallo. So now we're going to be doing a special on Anthony Fauci and the Charles Ponzi, of the Ponzi scheme, and Bernie Madoff. This is a commentary by Charles Ortley, and I'll be doing it in the near future. But Charles once again tells us that how do we know that the pork population, the pigs, are not also vectors from the bat virus, and hence how do we not know that eating pork, working with pork, could be spreading the coronavirus? There's indication that that's possible. We're going to bring on the scientists to discuss that in depth. So you see, we try to be on all the things that are important and give you the truth. One last thing before we take our break. I want to share some of just the latest statistics, and everything I'm sharing you is from a qualified source. And wasn't it Mark Twain who said there are 3 kinds of lies, damn lies, and statistics? It's long been known that the benign coronavirus species are capable of causing 15 to 30% of common colds, usually symptoms runny nose, cough, sore throat. This reality was recently mentioned in an international famous virologist, symposium from Germany. And in an interview where he also admitted that laboratory confirmation of COVID-19 is next to impossible given the high incidence of both false positive COVID-19 PCR swab tests, the ones they take in your nose, and false positive COVID-19 serum antibody tests where they take your blood. Apparently, neither test seems to be able to distinguish between the benign coronaviruses that can cause common colds and the more severe or deadly coronavirus that actually causes COVID-19. And Dr. Fauci's ignorance of this, the fact justified his oft-repeated assertions in his endless media rounds and White House press conferences prior to the ill-fated economic shutdown. What did he say? Quote, "I think we should be overly aggressive even if we get criticized for overreacting. I think America would be prepared to hunker down," end quote. No, you caused 41% of all small businesses to go permanently bankrupt. You've caused over 160 million Americans to enter abject poverty. You, sir, are one of the most reprehensible people on this planet. And yet he is the long-term king, emperor of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease. Oh, by the way, he also holds HIV vaccine patents and holder of the patent for the Santa Fe Pasteur Corporation's dengue virus vaccine that recently killed 600 Filipino children. Did anyone in the media challenge him? Did anyone say, "Dr. Fauci, isn't it true that the patent that you hold in the vaccine, that vaccine killed 600 Filipino children? Do their lives matter?" Oh, I forgot. This is about class, isn't it? I'll deal with that later. Fauci didn't answer. But another expert, a Dr. Christian Drostem, D-R-O-S-T-E-M, he is director of Berlin University's Institute of Virology, and he's known as the German's real face on the corona crisis. He quoted differently. Just within the last month, he talked about, quote, "Some virologists now assume that there are people who have become immune to COVID-19 unnoticed because they have had a relatively harmless corona cold in the past. It is quite the case that we expect that there may be an unnoticed background immunity due to cold coronaviruses because they are related to the corona 2 virus in a certain way." And he goes on to talk about that, and including many challenges to the death count, and we'll deal with that as well. That we've been overblown on the deaths attributed to corona were actually from other dying diseases, comorbidities. We're going to take a break and come back. Please stay with us. This is simply a overview of some of the important understandings of different types of servants, indentured, and the different types of slavery. First of all, I'm going to be very clear and unequivocal. All slavery is wrong. And yet I've seen different religions justify slavery, where they'll say, well, we're not going to use our own religious members as slaves, but we'll take others, but we'll be good to them. I don't accept that. I don't accept that you can take a slave because you've won a battle or you've taken over a city and somehow you're going to be good to them. That, to me, is an oxymoron. But I want to start with my own ancestry, the Irish. There's a lot of controversy over whether Irish were in fact slaves or indentured servants, despite the semantics. In the case of African slaves in the New World, it was chattel slavery, meaning perpetual and hereditary, with subhuman legal status. You're merely an object to be exploited. Under 17th century colonial laws, Irish who were defined as bonded Europeans were classified as indentured servants. Many Irish were sent to Barbados. Matthew Riley at Brown's University, with an academic background in Barbadian slavery, asserts that, quote, "The Irish slave myth is not supported by the historical evidence. Historians note that unlike slaves, most indentured servants willingly entered into contracts with another person, only served for a finite period, did not pass their unfree status on to their children, and were still considered human." A French priest who visited the island in 1954 noted how poorly they were treated Families were split up, purposely sold to different plantation owners. That was 1854. So in the Isles, Irish, although treated less harshly than African slaves, were still regarded as legal property of the owner. But British citizens who were guilty of crimes would also be sent to Barbados as indentured servants. An exceptional case was the Caribbean Isle of Montserrat, which became predominantly Irish at all levels of the society and who exploited the African slave trade. In 2008, a myth became widespread. Now here's the myth. The first slaves shipped to the American colonies in 1619 were 100 Irish children. The Irish slave trade began when James II sold 30,000 Irish prisoners as slaves to the New World, and Ireland became the biggest source of human livestock for Irish merchants. These were myths, and they were found to have originated with U.S. white nationalists and neo-Confederates and also anti-British activists in Ireland. It became popular among the 19th century Young Ireland movement. One expert in this area is Leon Hogan, an Irish historian, and he argues that the tens of thousands of Irish, and British too, who became indentured servants did so willingly for a set number of years, which was a way to get across the Atlantic. Many others ended up being forcibly deported and sold into indentured servitude after doing so. Their servitude was temporary, not like chattel slavery, but still they were treated terribly by their master, and many would die before their time of service ended. Difference was that as indentured servants, they did have avenues for legal action against their British masters. Now, Celtic Ireland had a slave caste in the form of a group. These people were not entitled to bear arms, nor to recompense if a family member was murdered. It was also not uncommon for these slaves to be sold off to labor to Roman Britain. And slavery in Ireland hit its height with the arrival of the Vikings. This warlike foreign force was fond of their, what they called thralls, Thralls, slaves. They took from the people they raided and conquered. Dublin served as the significant hub for the sale of Gaelic slaves, both domestically and internationally. And such slaves were so prolific throughout the Norse world that a significant proportion of Scandinavian DNA can be traced back to Irish slaves. This goes specifically for Iceland, where DNA of the average resident is around 30% Gaelic. To say the life of a thrall or slave was brutal would be a massive understatement. Both physical and psychological abuse was common for these slaves. In fact, it appears that upon their master's death, thralls were often ritually sacrificed, meaning slaughtered, in order to follow their master into the afterlife. Arab explorer and theologian Ibn Fadlan describes one such sacrifice in gruesome detail, writing that a female slave was raped by vulnerable men, stabbed, and finally throttled before burning with her master and the rest of his goods. Then you had your Barbary pirates. Most people don't know this, but from the early 16th to late 18th century, Barbary pirates primarily traded in slaves. They captured unsuspecting people in coastal villages and selling them in their base cities in Algiers, Tripoli, and Tunis. White slaves were of particular value to these pirates, with Caucasian females often fetching far higher prices within the Ottoman trade compared to women of other backgrounds. Historians estimate that 1.25 million people of European descent were abducted and sold into slavery by the pirates. The sack of Baltimore in West Cork is perhaps the most famous of these Barbary raids, led by the famous Dutch Muslim convert and pirate Murat Rees the Younger. Barbary pirates abducted the entire population of mostly Protestant settlers in a single night. As a result, Baltimore was abandoned until the 18th century. Then you have the Ottomans, today's Turkey. Ottoman Empire was truly built on slavery. Between a fifth and a quarter of all the population of Istanbul at one stage were slaves, consisting of laborers, concubines, even bureaucrats. Quite famously, a significant part of the Ottoman Empire's military were made up of slave converts, taken from non-Muslim families as boys and molded into the empire's most elite soldiers. Let's look at Greece. Slavery was an accepted practice in ancient Greece, as in other societies of the time. Some ancient Greek writers, including most notably Aristotle, describe slavery as natural and even necessary. The Stoics produced the first recorded condemnation of slavery. The principal use of slaves was in agriculture, but they were also used in stone quarries or mines and as domestic servants. Athens had the largest slave population, with as many as 80,000 in the 5th and 6th centuries BC, with an average of 3 or 4 slaves per household, except in poor families. Rome, we know they had a large slave population and trade through the empire. And in India, slavery in India was an established institution in ancient India by the start of the Common Era, or likely earlier. Many slaves from the Horn of Africa were also imported into the Indian subcontinent to serve in the households of the powerful of the Muslim armies of the Deccan Sultanates and the Mughal Empire. Slavery in India continued through the 18th and 19th century. Now, during the colonial times, Indians were taken into different parts of the world as slaves by the British East Indian Company and the British Empire. Over 1 million indentured laborers, also in the country from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar and Malabar, were taken as slave laborers to European colonies of British, Dutch, Portuguese, Fiji, South African, Trinidad, and Tobago. In China, slavery and bans on slavery went back and forth during the various dynasties. The earliest evidence of slavery in China dates to the Shang dynasty in 2000 BC, when 5% of the population were enslaved. The Shang dynasty engaged in frequent raids of surrounding states, capturing slaves who would be killed in ritual sacrifices. Scholars disagree as to whether these victims were also used as a source of slave labor. In Ming dynasty, which was the 14th to 16th century, Java sent 300 black slaves as tribute to the emperor. In the Qing dynasty, 17th to 20th century, oversaw an expansion in slavery in states of bondage. They possessed about 2 million slaves upon their conquest of China. Illegal acts of forced labor and sexual slavery in China continue today. Look at the Uyghurs. In Central America, the Aztecs, slavery was an essential class. Slave owners were required to provide food, water, and shelter for their slaves. The richest merchants in Mexico society were slave traders. In Maya, they were usually orphans, war prisoners, criminals, or children of slaves. Although they weren't necessarily mistreated by their owners, slaves still had no rights, no privileges in society. Their only function in society was to do all the manual labor, which means that all of the temples they had to build. They were also the most frequently used for human sacrifice rituals. An exception, the Incas. Unlike no other slavery system, or they had no slavery system. Instead, the government expected all citizens to put in their fair share of hard work for the empire as a whole. And since there was no tribute, meaning tax, system, peasants were expected to serve government officials with physical labor instead. When the Spaniards invaded, they were shocked to find that the Incas would rather do hard work than give up some of their material goods. And then you have neo-slavery. This is the 21st century, what we could call, for our linguistic argument, institutional slavery. It generates about $150 billion a year, between 21 to 46 million institutional slaves in the world today. International labor organizations estimate there are 40 million living in some form of slavery, 25 million forced labor, of who 16 million are exploited by the private corporation sector as domestic work construction. If you want the specifics, look at Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Qatar. Let me go a little further there. Why don't we ask the very wealthiest and most successful, like Tiger Woods, or the other celebrities who go there to play golf or and to Dubai, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, all of that, every brick in there was built by slave labor. Today, it also exists. No scandal has ever dislodged it. You go into the country being promised a nice wage, your passport is taken, you're taken out into the desert, you're put into what amounts to an internment camp. Every morning before sunset, you're driven into the city, you work under blisteringly hot conditions that no American will be allowed to work in, 120 degrees. Many people die, they give you little or no money, and you can't leave. That is the ruler, the ruthless ruler, the emir of that whole country. But that's true all throughout the Middle East in these major countries. And yet, why is there no protest against them? Why are we not boycotting their products, boycotting their cities? Because then it's no longer about race, it's about class. You see, unless I miss something, we have been led to believe that it's all about race, when I believe race is the secondary outcome of a class warfare. For example, when was the last time you heard of people on Wall Street being visited by the police and asked to open up their pockets, put their contents on the table? Never. How about going from a Broadway theater at night? Never. How about going up Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, Madison Avenue, stopping the citizens that come out of their residence, Central Park West, Central Park South? Never. Not once. No, but if you're a poor person of color, yes, hundreds of thousands per year, and then you put them into prison. What if you reversed it? What if you only stopped and frisked and only profiled wealthy Caucasians and put them in prison? No leniency. Same brutal and punishable offense, you put them in. What would happen then? You see, while we're all fighting and being misfocused on healing and working in conciliation and cooperation, they're controlling the game. Look to see who is accepted into society and who is not. Who controls and who does not. That's about class. And class doesn't care about your color. It doesn't care about your background. You can be an atheist, or they don't care, because you're serving them. And as long as you serve them, like on the Council on Foreign Relations, oh, your future is made. Challenge them, and you're deplatformed. For example, we have 25 million forced labor who work, and 16 million are exploited by the private corporate sector as domestic work and construction agriculture. What about all the prisoners who are paid $1 a day to make billions of dollars of profit for corporations? Is that not a form of exploiting a person? 5 million in forced sexual exploitation. 4 million in forced labor by government authorities. 15 million in forced marriage. 71% of slaves today are female. Children comprise 26% of slaves today. Give me an example. North Korea, the largest institutional slave force, thousands of labor camps. Eritrea, 400,000 people in forced indefinite military service programs. Zimbabwe, the diamond trade. Who minds your diamonds? Slave labor. In China, prison labor system. In the U.S., prison labor system. And return of road gangs and the firefighters in western states. The people saving your life and saving your house are a form of debt slave. Texas, Georgia, Alabama, and Arkansas are the worst for forced labor, prison labor, without any compensation. And again, Dubai, boycott it. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, they use forced migrant labor of foreign workers. Haiti, forced child labor and dominant form of slavery. In the United Arab Emirates, the Khalfa system, which ties migrant workers to local Emirates sponsors with very little government oversight. Now, our government knows this. Has it done anything to stop us from participating? No. But let me tell you how, just like we can do something positive about global warming and our agricultural system by the advice I gave at the beginning, here's what we can do to challenge slavery today in any form. We can stop buying their products. Do you realize in the Congo today, you have hundreds of thousands of children working in mines under brutal conditions, and they're not there voluntarily. And the people overseeing them will brutalize them. There are videos of them being beaten up. A little kid. They're carrying all this mud out of holes and clay to get the minerals inside that are used in your cell phone, your computers. All the things that you pride yourself make your life more convenient and easy, much of that came from these horrendous working conditions. And even when it didn't come from there and came from China, from Foxconn, they had to put netting outside of the factories because people were jumping off to kill themselves. They were living in barracks in very inhumane circumstances. Did we stop buying their product? Well, isn't it a little hypocritical to say you're against people being exploited and then buying the very product that they make from that exploitation? And one of the most egregious is people who say, like Hillary Clinton, that she's for women and women want her because she's a woman advocate. She's the least advocate for women in American history. Her and Margaret Sanger. And Margaret Sanger, by the way, was an avowed racist. She prided herself in racism. She wanted to see more dead Africans. She wrote about it. I've quoted her verbatim. I've read all of her books. I've read all of her articles. That's part of what I do for the scholarship. Why aren't we challenging her? But she isn't being challenged. Hillary Clinton, she was on the board of Walmart, and they were saying, fair labor. It wasn't. Look at the clothes that were made in Bangladesh, 14 cents an hour, the shortest lifespan of people in the women in the working environment in the world, in the mid-30s. They have to go early in the morning before sunlight, work all day. In some factories, they're only allowed to get up 2 or 3 times to go to the bathroom. And then they walk home at night, have to prepare the food for their family, so you can get one of their 900 million cheaply made clothes. But that woman had to suffer. Now, is she a slave? No. Was she exploited? Yes. Can you be for women's rights and at the same time buy garments because they're cheap? Or even designer garments are made the same way, and then say, I'm still for women's rights? I don't think so. But in our current society, we'll allow ourselves any excuse not to face a deeper reality, that we are a class-conscious society. Just 2 weeks ago, there was a report that finally established by 2 universities that having an Ivy League degree from Brown and Harvard and Yale and Princeton, Stanford, Columbia, etc., it does not give you any more education, meaning going to a state university, you're going to get the same quality education you would from Harvard. That's the reality. Now, many of us who are academics, and I have been, know that truth. But what it does give you, it gives you a certain panache. It gives you the bragging rights. So you went to Harvard. So the perception, which is a completely artificial projection, it is an illusion. Oh, you went to Harvard. Well, you would be first in line to get a job. Why? Because I'm buying into a perception? That's elitism. That is class. That's a person wanting to be at the top. Like in Indian society, if you're an untouchable, you don't get any good jobs. You're the street cleaner. You're the latrine cleaner. You can't even walk beside someone of a higher class because your shadow might hit that person. That would be considered an offense. But if you're a Brahmin, the highest level, well, that's different. No, you're still the same human being. It's just that you have a different class. So watch what happens in a class-based society of how they determine your value. Then they will determine your value by your race, by your age, by your gender, by your education. Then all those boxes matter once you are no longer in their social class. But if you're in their social class, that's different. Suddenly all that becomes insignificant. And that's part of our problem. We're not looking deeply enough at the behind-the-scene larger issue that has driven slavery. The poor have not driven slavery throughout the world. The wealthy and powerful have. The poor have not used slave labor to build their factories and their cities and their cathedrals and their mosques. The powerful have. So let us put everything in perspective. We need a reset. We need to focus upon those in power who will lie and manipulate and exploit a COVID virus to their advantage, will exploit mistrust in the president, which is legitimate, but It is a coup, and by any notion, those people should not be using us to be manipulating our brain and our perception when they've lied repeatedly about everything. A media that is solely 100% captured by the special interest groups. But they're being rewarded. Once you're in that circle, you're rewarded until you threaten them on any level, and then you're shamed and you're deplatformed. That's how the system works. But until such time that we reverse it and we pull away from their media, stop watching their television, stop listening to their radio, stop reading their newspaper, stop buying their books, stop supporting their banks, stop using their credit cards, stop voting for them in elections, and seek non-private funds so every election is publicly funded only, then nothing will change. So it's really irrelevant to all of us what's going to happen in the White House. And if you doubt that, I can show you everything that happened in the Obama White House, in the Bush White House, in the Clinton White House, in the Trump White House. Same cast of carriers behind all of it. Just different personalities up front and different systems. Do we get angry when a guy is smiling and like Obama and charming and supports the pipeline, Keystone Pipeline, again, across indigenous land? No, only the protesters did. But the average citizen didn't care. So you see, we're very specific in the people we support, the systems we support, and unfortunately, that's to our detriment. Just challenge all authority and power, because we shouldn't be allowing people to have this kind of micro-managed control over our lives, because there goes our rights, there goes our freedoms, there goes everything that's meaningful. These are my thoughts today. I wanted to share them with you. Hopefully you'll find something within them that will give you a pause and a deeper perspective. Have a nice day, everyone.